"Mom, please, go to the back table with the catering staff. This front section is reserved for important guests," my daughter told me, her words ringing out in front of some of the attendees. My name is Norma. I'm 72 years old, and all my life I was taught that silence was golden. What my daughter didn't know was that I was the sole owner of the very event hall she was currently standing in. The sound of the string quartet seemed to fade into the air, drowned out by the echo of her voice. Luciana looked at me with that familiar impatience I'd known since she was a little girl, her eyes narrowed and jaw tense, expecting me to bow my head and obey without a fuss. She wore an emerald green silk dress that looked like it was cutting off her circulation and held a half-finished champagne flute in her right hand. Around us, the grand ballroom of the Fresno Manor buzzed with activity. Waitstaff, in immaculate black vests and white gloves, glided between round tables covered with imported linen tablecloths. The air smelled of fresh orchids and roasted duck, a combination that always turned my stomach a bit. But for my daughter, it represented the pinnacle of social success. I didn't cry. My eyes didn't well up with tears, nor did I feel that lump in my throat they talk about in novels. I'm not one to cry when humiliated. I'm one to observe, to memorize, and to calculate. I nodded slowly, an almost imperceptible movement of my head, and turned away. The journey from the center of the dance floor to the back of the ballroom felt endless, not from shame, but from the crushing clarity with which I began to see my entire life. Each step on the polished marble floor echoed in my low-heeled shoes. I passed the main table, where my son-in-law, Stephen, was roaring with laughter at a tasteless joke the city mayor had just told. Stephen had a habit of laughing loudly when near someone with political or economic power, and pursing his lips in contempt when speaking to employees. Today, he and Luciana had turned my great-grandson's christening into a public relations event, a flimsy attempt to plaster over the cracks in his construction company. I walked past table number 2, where Stephen's new investors sat men in grey suits who looked at their phones more than at the celebrated baby. I passed table 3, where my grandson, Daniel, was trying to calm little Emilio, while his wife, Marina, shot me a look of apology and confusion as she watched me walk towards the back. Poor Marina. Luciana had treated her like a glorified incubator from the day she found out about the pregnancy. I reached the small round table nestled almost against the swinging kitchen doors. It had no orchid centerpiece, just a solitary salt shaker and paper napkins that contrasted starkly with the fine linen of the other tables. This was where the photographers, musicians on break, and coordination staff left their coats and secretly grabbed water. I sat on a metal folding chair that groaned under my weight. The light here was different, less warm, polluted by the fluorescent glare that escaped each time a waiter pushed open the kitchen door. The constant clang of plates, silverware falling onto plastic trays, and shouted orders simmered to form an impenetrable barrier that separated me from the luxury up front. I placed my black handbag on my lap and smoothed the skirt of my grey dress, a dress I had sewn myself, stitch by careful stitch, because I always preferred the quality of my own hands to the pretentious labels Luciana begged me to buy. I watched the comings and goings of the waitstaff. The exhaustion of the past 3 weeks settled on my shoulders like a concrete block. Emilio's christening hadn't organized itself. Luciana had hired an incredibly expensive event planner. Yes, but the planner hadn't comforted a colicky baby at 3 a.m. I had temporarily moved into Daniel and Marina's house to help them through the first months. Marina was worn out, recovering from a complicated C-section, and Daniel worked 1 4-hour days at the law firm to pay the mortgage his own father, Stephen, had convinced him to take on. For 21 days, I washed bottles, ironed tiny clothes, prepared nourishing broths for Marina, and cradled Emilio in the dim pre-dawn hours while the rest of the world slept. Luciana, on the other hand, appeared twice a week at 11 a.m., wearing dark sunglasses and carrying bags from exclusive children's boutiques. She'd take the baby from his crib, dress him in sailor suits that irritated his skin, take 400 photos with her phone, upload them to her social media, and then hand him back to me, crying because she had a manicure appointment. "Oh, Mom, you have so much more patience for tantrums," she'd say before disappearing, leaving a trail of sweet perfume and dirty baby bottles. And then there was the christening gown. Luciana had insisted Emilio wear a French antique she'd seen in a magazine, but when she saw the price, she suddenly decided that family tradition was more important. She brought me a dusty cardboard box containing the gown Daniel had worn almost 30 years ago. It was yellowed, the lace frayed, and 3 buttons were missing from the back. "Fix it, Mom. You have those magical hands," she ordered, leaving the box on my sewing table without even asking if I had the time or energy. For 4 consecutive nights, I sat under the light of my sewing lamp, carefully unpicking the ruined lace with surgical precision, hand-washing the fabric with neutral soap and baking soda to restore its whiteness, and sewing on new bobbin lace that I had bought myself with my pension. I replaced the missing buttons with 3 small mother-of-pearl beads cut from an old necklace my own mother had given me. When I handed the finished gown to Luciana this very morning at the church, she didn't even glance at it. She snatched it from my hands and gave it to the nanny she'd hired just for today, so the nanny could carry the baby while Luciana greeted the important guests. This blindness of Luciana's to others' efforts was nothing new. It had always been this way since she was a teenager. My late husband, Arthur, used to say that we had spoiled our only daughter too much to compensate for the hardships we experienced in our youth. Arthur and I weren't born with silver spoons. When we married at 20, our only assets were a 2-burner stove and a fierce determination not to starve. We started by selling lunches to construction workers in the industrial zone. I cooked from 4 a.m. and he delivered on a rusty bicycle. Little by little, we bought a food cart, then rented a small space, then founded an industrial catering company, and finally made the leap to the luxury event business. Arthur was a man of rough hands and a frank smile. He was never ashamed of smelling of onions and bleach. We worked side by side for 45 years. We had no free weekends, no overseas vacations, no expensive hobbies. Every penny we earned, we reinvested in the future. In time, Arthur proved to have a keen eye for real estate. When the city began to expand south, he bought empty lots no one wanted. He said the city would grow and the wealthy would seek spacious places for their weddings and parties. He was right. One of those properties was an old, crumbling estate surrounded by centuries-old trees. It took us 5 years to restore it. Arthur oversaw the masonry, salvaged the original wooden beams, and planted dozens of new ash trees. I designed the industrial kitchen, the service flows, the layout of the ballrooms. It was our masterpiece. We called it Fresno Manor. When we finished, we decided not to operate it ourselves. We were already tired, and Arthur's knees were starting to give out. We created a corporation, San Miguel Holdings, and leased it to a prestigious event operating firm with a 20-year contract. They provided the brand name, the staff, and the clients. We collected a substantial percentage from each event and maintained absolute ownership of the land and facilities. Luciana never understood the magnitude of our business. To her, we were just the food service people. When she married Stephen, a recently graduated architect with a fancy surname and little money, she was ashamed that her parents had to work Saturday nights. Arthur bought her first house, paid for Daniel's college, and saved Stephen from bankruptcy at least 3 times. But Luciana always presented these financial rescues as smart investments made by her husband. When Arthur passed away 7 years ago, a sudden heart attack that ripped half my soul away, Luciana assumed I would liquidate everything and distribute the inheritance. Instead, I made it clear that I maintain control of San Miguel Holdings. I gave her a generous monthly allowance, but the main assets remained in my name. Luciana never knew exactly which properties were part of the company. She never asked. To her, business was boring and uncouth. All that mattered was that the bank transfer arrived on the 5th of every month. So, when the event planner offered to rent Fresno Manor for the christening, boasting that it was the most exclusive and difficult to book venue in the region, Luciana immediately accepted to impress Stephen's friends. She had no idea she was legally renting my own house. And there I was, the owner of every wooden beam, every square foot of marble, and every oven in the kitchen, sitting at the back table with the catering staff. A young waiter, in his uniform, pushed through the swinging door, carrying an empty tray. He stopped at my table, sighed heavily, and rubbed the back of his neck. He looked at me with surprise, surely wondering what an elderly woman in a grey dress was doing in their break area. I offered him a short, tight smile, the kind that doesn't invite conversation. He returned a timid gesture and hurried back into the kitchen at the harsh shout of the floor manager. From my position, I had a perfect view of the entire ballroom. It looked like a play, and I was the only audience member who knew the ending. I saw Stephen sweating in his suit, leaning towards the mayor with a fawning servility that made me sick. I saw Luciana circulating from table to table, touching the shoulders of politicians' wives, showing off her grandson's gown, never once mentioning who had sewn the buttons. The morning had started badly at the church. I arrived early by taxi because Stephen said the family car was full of floral decorations. I sat in the second row, leaving the first free for the parents and godparents, as protocol dictated. But when Luciana arrived, she brought the mayor's wife and the lead investor's wife with her. Without even looking me in the eye, she made a hurried gesture with her hand for me to move to the third row, whispering that she needed the honorary godmothers at the front for photographs. I quietly stood up and gave up my seat. Throughout the entire mass, I saw my daughter's back. I noticed her reapplying lipstick using her phone's front camera while the priest sprinkled holy water on Emilio's head. I felt a deep pang in my chest, not of sadness, but of a disappointment so old it barely hurt anymore. It just weighed with the force of a stone at the bottom of a lake. After the ceremony, I went straight to the reception. The taxi driver dropped me off in front of the imposing wrought iron gates of the estate. The security guard at the entrance gruffly asked for my ID. I didn't blame him. He worked for the operating agency and didn't know my face, as my dealings were always direct with the firm's directors at the main office. I simply showed him my invitation card and walked in along the crunchy gravel path. As I crossed the gardens, I paused for a moment in front of the largest oak tree, the one Arthur and I had saved from a termite infestation 15 years prior. I ran my hand over the rough bark and felt a brutal connection to the earth beneath my feet. This was my history. This place was the sweat of my husband and my sleepless nights. And now it was decorated with white fabrics and twinkling lights to celebrate the vanity of a daughter who respected neither. When I entered the main ballroom, I looked for my name on the elegant, transparent acrylic panel where the guest list was displayed. I looked for table 1. It wasn't there. I looked for table 2, reserved for immediate family. It wasn't there. I checked tables 3 and 4. Nothing. For a second, I thought it was a printing error from the expensive printer Luciana had hired. I approached the main table, where Luciana was scolding a waiter because the air conditioning was too low for her liking. I stood beside her, patiently waiting for her to finish humiliating the young man, who only nodded with his head down. When she finally turned, her face showed a fleeting expression of annoyance at seeing me standing there, claiming a space in her perfectly choreographed world. I quietly asked her, so as not to embarrass her in front of others, where I was supposed to sit, since my name didn't appear on the entrance panel. It was then that she uttered the phrase. She took me by the elbow, with that firm, false grip of someone feigning affection while twisting a knife. She pulled me a few steps into the side aisle, away from the ears of her wealthy friends. Her perfume invaded my nostrils, strong, sweet, and artificial. "Mum, please, go to the back table with the catering staff. This front section is reserved for important guests," she said. The words left her mouth with terrifying naturalness, as if she were asking me to pass the salt. "Stephen is about to close a multi-million-dollar contract with the mayor and his partners. We need the main tables to present a corporate image. You can't be there in your grey dress with your stories of selling food on the street. You don't fit in. Be reasonable. Go to the back. I'll send you a plate of what we're eating." She released my elbow and, without waiting for a response, turned to greet a local politician with a radiant smile, as if she'd just flipped a switch on her face. I stood there for about 10 seconds. In my head, there were no shouts of indignation. I don't operate on hysteria. My mind, shaped by decades of balancing ledgers and dealing with suppliers, simply registered the fact as a hard, irrefutable data point. My daughter considered me a social hindrance at the celebration of my own flesh and blood. She saw me as the family's old maid, useful for sewing old clothes and changing diapers at dawn, but unworthy of sharing a public meal. That asymmetry struck me with the precision of a sharp scalpel. I had given her everything. I had built an empire in the shadows so she could walk in the sun without burning her feet. And her response, her gratitude, was to send me to the dark corner next to the kitchen, hiding the poverty of her origins so as not to scare away the sharks her husband was trying to swim with in a sea that didn't belong to them. I returned to the present at the back table. The clatter of plates anchored me back to immediate reality. I observed one of the older waitresses, a woman my age with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, leaning against the kitchen doorframe. She discreetly removed a black shoe to relieve the pain of a bunion deforming her foot. I recognized in her tired gaze the look of someone who had been on her feet for hours serving people who didn't even thank her when receiving a full plate. In that instant, I knew exactly which side of the room my true people were on. I was more like that tired waitress than the woman in the emerald silk dress who shared my blood. Luciana had made a fatal miscalculation. She believed my silence was submission. She believed my grey dress was a sign of weakness. She believed that because I was her mother, I would swallow the humiliation in silence to protect the family peace of appearances. But family peace had shattered the moment she decided my dignity was worth less than her husband's construction contract. A waiter rushed past with a pitcher of ice water and stumbled slightly on the leg of my folding chair. "Excuse me, ma'am," he mumbled, startled, expecting a severe scolding he was probably used to at these kinds of parties. "Don't worry, son," I replied, my voice firm and serene. He looked relieved and continued on his way to the bar. My gaze swept across the immense ballroom and fixed again on the main table. The first course was being served to the VIP guests, a delicate avocado and lobster timbale garnished with edible flowers. I saw Luciana raise her champagne glass and tap the crystal with a silver spoon to get the room's attention. The entire ballroom gradually quieted, the volume of trivial conversations lowering. Stephen stood up, adjusting his silk tie, ready to deliver a speech about family, divine blessings, and undoubtedly the brilliant economic future of the city. A not-so-subtle wink to the mayor, who smiled complacently to his right. Everyone was focused on them. Everyone believed in the illusion of prosperity and lineage they were projecting under the crystal lights, everyone but me. I slowly opened my black handbag. My fingers brushed against my cell phone, a packet of tissues, and the small plastic case with my blood pressure pills. I didn't need any of that right now. What I needed was cool air and absolute perspective. I took a deep breath, feeling the oxygen fill my lungs and straighten my back, instantly relieving the fatigue of the past 3 weeks. I wasn't going to make a scene from my folding chair. I wasn't going to scream complaints or cry like a victim in front of 200 guests who didn't even know my name. That would be playing their game, perfectly falling into the role of the resentful, hysterical old woman Luciana would later use to justify hiding me from her friends. No, my justice wasn't going to be a fleeting emotional tantrum. It was going to be cold, surgical, and irreversibly devastating. Arthur had taught me, in the long years of building the company, that true power never needs to raise its voice. It only needs to be exercised with precision at the right moment and place. Slowly, I stood up. The metal chair creaked again under my weight. A harsh, industrial sound lost beneath the initial applause for the speech Stephen was beginning to deliver. I took my black handbag by its leather handles and firmly slung it over my right forearm. I left my grey wool coat folded over the back of the folding chair, a mute, physical sign that I had been there, that I had occupied for a few minutes the unworthy place assigned to me. I didn't look towards the main table, didn't search for Luciana's gaze to see if she noticed my absence, nor Daniel's. I had seen enough falseness for one evening. I turned on my heel, definitively turning my back on the artificial luxury, the imported flowers that nauseated me, and the plastic smiles of the important people. I took the first step away from the table, walking through the small, bustling staff break area. I passed directly in front of the heavy, swinging kitchen doors just as they burst open from a service cart passing through. The dense smell of burnt butter, meat broths, and spices hit my face, a familiar scent that reminded me of where I came from. Inside the kitchen, chaos was at its peak, with chefs in white jackets shouting cross orders and the head chef frantically checking main dishes before they went out into the ballroom. I walked down the narrow carpeted hallway that separated the service area from the staff restrooms and the emergency exit. This dimly lit corridor connected directly to the private administrative offices of the estate, a restricted area that guests never saw, but which I knew by heart because I myself had approved the architectural plans for every wall 20 years ago. No one stopped me. The few employees I passed in the hallway were too busy, carrying full trays or cleaning wine-stained glasses, to pay attention to a serious old woman walking with leaden steps towards the forbidden zone. I reached the thick, solid oak door that separated the service corridor from the rear administrative lobby. Stephen's speech, amplified by the powerful microphones in the main ballroom, reached here as a low, unintelligible murmur, vibrating through the walls like the annoying hum of a distant swarm of wasps. I pushed the door with my flat hand, feeling the comforting solidity of the wood against my palm and the weight of the well-oiled hinges. I stepped into the administrative lobby, where the air conditioning was blasting and the atmosphere was completely still and silent, utterly oblivious to the social charade unfolding just a few yards away. I took a final step forward, crossing the threshold into the territory I governed in the shadows. I released the heavy polished brass doorknob and let the heavy oak door close slowly behind me. The metallic click of the security lock echoed in the empty hallway, a definitive, sharp, dry sound that abruptly cut off my son-in-law's voice, leaving everything in a profound and absolute silence. The echo of the metallic click of the lock was the first truly honest sound I had heard all afternoon. Releasing the polished brass knob, the constant buzz of the party, the fake laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, and my son-in-law's amplified voice were all muffled behind the thick, solid oak. I found myself standing in the administrative hallway, a long, silent corridor that breathed with the low, constant hum of the central air conditioning. Here, there were no imported linen tablecloths or pretentious orchids. The floor was covered by industrial dark grey carpet, designed to absorb the sound of hurried footsteps, and the walls, painted in a neutral almond tone, were decorated solely with a series of black and white photographs framed in simple wood. I walked slowly down the hallway, letting my eyes adjust to the dimmer, more functional light of this area. My low-heeled shoes sank slightly into the carpet, completely muffling my advance. I paused for a moment in front of the third photograph on the left wall. It was an image taken almost 2 decades ago. In it, Arthur appeared with a white construction hard hat tilted back, his shirt stained with drywall dust, pointing with a calloused hand to the space where the grand main ballroom window now stood. Beside him was I, younger, my still dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, holding a roll of architectural blueprints against my chest. We were dirty, tired, and surrounded by rubble, but on our faces was a smile of absolute triumph. We had bought a ruin and were raising an empire with our own hands. I ran the tip of my index finger over the glass of the frame, right over my late husband's smiling face. "Look what they've done with our home, old man," I murmured, in the solitude of the hallway. The knot of disappointment I had felt in the ballroom began to harden, transforming into a cold, crystal-clear resolve. I was no longer the humiliated mother sent to eat with the staff. I was once again the woman of the blueprints, the owner of every inch of land beneath my feet. I continued my walk until I reached the last door in the corridor. It was wider than the others, with a brushed brass plaque in the center that read, "General Management, Operations." I didn't knock. I've never had to ask permission to enter a room I built with my own money. I turned the knob and pushed the wooden door, which opened with a smooth, silent glide. The office was spacious, dominated by a huge mahogany desk in the center and a window that offered a private view of the estate's back gardens, away from the guest site. Behind the desk, surrounded by files, lit monitors, and half-finished coffee cups, sat Sylvia Montenegro. Sylvia was the general manager of the operating agency to which I leased the venue, a 8-year-old woman with impeccable posture, dressed in a navy blue pantsuit that showed not a single wrinkle despite the hours of work. Sylvia was not just a commercial tenant. She was a brilliant professional whom I myself had interviewed and approved when we signed the lease agreement 10 years ago. She knew perfectly well the ownership structure of San Miguel Holdings. She knew that the old woman in the grey dress who had just walked through her door was not just any guest. Upon hearing the door, Sylvia looked up from her screen. Her hands froze on the keyboard, her eyes widened, and she stood up so quickly that her office chair rolled back and gently hit the window. "Miss Norma," Sylvia exclaimed, her voice tinged with a mix of surprise and deep confusion. "My goodness, I didn't know you were here. No one at the entrance alerted me to your arrival. Is something wrong with the maintenance? Do you need anything? Please, have a seat." I approached the desk with a firm stride, feeling the office's atmosphere, charged with operational tension, envelop me like a familiar old coat. "They didn't tell you because I arrived by taxi, Sylvia, and I entered through the main door like any other guest," I replied in a neutral tone, placing my black handbag on the mahogany surface, or rather, like a second-class guest. "Don't worry about the security staff. They don't need to know my face. That's what I pay you for." Sylvia frowned, clearly flustered. She came out from behind her desk and pulled one of the heavy leather visitor chairs closer to me. "But, Miss Norma, we have a private event today. It's the Valdez family christening. In fact, the host is architect Stephen Valdez. I understand he's your..." Sylvia stopped short. Her eyes widened even further as the pieces clicked into place. She knew who my son-in-law was, although our business interactions had always been kept strictly separate from my family life. "Wait, you're the baby's grandmother. You should be at the main table. What are you doing back here in the offices during your son-in-law's speech?" I slowly sat in the leather chair, feeling the comfort of the cushioning embrace my tired back. I clasped my hands in my lap and held Sylvia's concerned gaze. My daughter and son-in-law decided that my grey dress and my lack of a fancy last name didn't fit the aesthetic of their main table, Sylvia. They sent me to the back, next to the kitchen doors, so I wouldn't scare away Stephen's investors or the mayor. Sylvia's face paled. The cold professionalism that characterized her cracked for a second, giving way to genuine indignation. She knew my story. She knew how Arthur and I had started by selling food on the street, and above all, she knew that the lease agreement allowing her agency to operate in this lucrative venue depended entirely on my signature. That's unacceptable, Miss Norma. It's an appalling lack of respect. If I had known, I would have come down myself to accommodate you. This is your ballroom. You own all of this. Do you want me to go right now and demand the floor manager find you a place in the center? I can have anyone moved. I raised a hand, stopping her impulse. No, Sylvia. I don't want a place at their table. I'm not interested in breaking bread with people who are ashamed of the hands that kneaded their fortune. What I want is information, and I want it now. Sylvia nodded quickly, regaining her executive posture. She returned to her side of the desk and sat down, ready to receive instructions. Whatever you need, Miss Norma, just say the word. I want to see the complete file for today's event. The contract, the budgets, the payment record, the special requests, absolutely everything Stephen Valdez and Luciana signed with your agency. Sylvia didn't hesitate for a second. Her fingers flew across her computer keyboard, opening the internal management system. As the laser printer in the corner began to hum and spit out hot sheets of paper, Sylvia opened a filing drawer and pulled out a thick black leather folder labeled Event 400 and 2 Valdez Christening. She placed it on the desk, opened it, and slid the documents towards me. Here you go, Sylvia said, adjusting her glasses. The contract was signed just 3 weeks ago. It was an emergency booking. Your daughter insisted they needed the venue to impress some key partners of architect Valdez. Since we had a last-minute cancellation, we gave it to them. I took my reading glasses from my handbag, put them on, and began to review the papers. The silence in the office was only interrupted by the sound of turning pages and my own measured breathing. I read the guest list, 200 people. I read the chosen menu, avocado and lobster timbale, duck, a l'orange with red fruit reduction, chocolate truffle cake. I read the extras, live string quartet, floral arrangements with imported orchids, open premium liquor bar. There was an obscene extravagance for a simple Sunday afternoon christening. But what I was really looking for wasn't on the menu, but on the last page, in the billing and payment terms section. My eyes scanned the figures. The total cost of the event was astronomical. enough to pay for my great-grandson's entire college education. However, upon reaching the deposits received line, I paused, frowned, and brought the paper closer to the desk lamp. "Sylvia," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low, "I'm seeing an initial 10% deposit and a marginal note about a promissory note. Explain this to me." Sylvia swallowed hard and leaned forward, clasping her hands on the desk. Her tone became defensive, not towards me, but towards the situation she now had to justify. It was a very atypical negotiation, Miss Norma. Architect Valdez came in person to sign. He told us his construction company was about to close a huge infrastructure contract with the municipal government. He assured us the mayor himself would attend the event as a show of support. Valdez demanded we give him a 90-day corporate credit line to settle the remaining 90% of the event. "And you agreed to finance a luxury party for him with a simple promissory note?" I asked, not raising my voice, but letting the sharpness of the question cut through the air. "We didn't want to," Sylvia quickly defended. "Our policy requires full payment 1 week before the event." But Valdez became very aggressive. He said he had influence, that he knew the real owners of the estate, and that if we didn't give him the credit, he would make sure we lost our operating license through his municipal contacts. He threatened to create a public scandal. I consulted with my agency's board of directors, and they decided that, given the political profile of the guests, it was better not to risk a legal or media problem. We accepted the 10% deposit and the promissory note in the name of Valdez Construction Incorporated. I let out a dry, bitter laugh that echoed in the office. I took off my glasses and dropped them onto the papers. Stephen's audacity was as great as his incompetence. Not only was he using his grandson's event to patch up his company's financial holes, but he was paying for the party with money he didn't have, extorting the operating agency, and bragging about knowing the owners of the venue, the woman in the grey dress whom they had just banished to the kitchen hallway. "Sylvia, do you know the real situation of Valdez Construction Incorporated?" I asked, looking at her intently. "Only what we read in the newspapers, Miss Norma, that they're expanding. They're in technical bankruptcy," I finished, feeling a strange relief at speaking the truth aloud. My husband saved him 3 times before he died, and now Stephen is betting everything on a municipal contract he hasn't even signed, using my own house as a stage to fake a wealth that vanished years ago. That 90-day promissory note is worthless. They have no way to pay you." Sylvia brought a hand to her mouth, processing the information. If the construction company didn't pay, the operating agency would have to absorb the full cost of the event, which represented a massive loss that would directly impact the dividends San Miguel Holdings collected at the end of the month. Before Sylvia could articulate a response, the heavy oak office door burst open. It wasn't a gentle push, but a brusque impact that made the picture frames on the hallway wall tremble. Marcos, the estate's executive chef, appeared in the doorway. He was a burly man in his 50s, dressed in a white chef's coat that showed recent splatters of dark sauce. His face was red from the heat of the stoves and from evident fury. He held a kitchen towel clenched in his right fist. Marcos was not just any employee. He was a culinary industry veteran, a strong-willed man who had worked with us since the days Arthur and I did industrial catering. I myself had designed the layout of his ovens. There was a silent, deep loyalty between us, forged in the fire of 1,000 stressful services. Marcos entered the office without looking at who was sitting in the visitor's chair. He walked directly towards Sylvia's desk. "Sylvia! I can't take another minute of these people!" the chef roared, waving the towel in the air. "I just sent the VIP dishes to the main table. And you know what the lady in the emerald green dress did? She sent the plates back. She said in front of everyone that the duck was cold and that the red fruit reduction looked like cheap jam. She called my sous chef useless and demanded I come out to personally apologize to the mayor. If they hadn't stopped me, I swear I would have gone out and thrown the duck at her husband's head." Marcos stopped short, breathing heavily. It was then that he lowered his gaze and saw me sitting in the leather chair, watching him in complete silence. The fury on his face instantly transformed into surprise and then into an almost reverential respect. His shoulders slumped, and he hid the towel behind his back. like a child caught misbehaving. "Miss Norma," he murmured, lowering his voice to a hoarse whisper. "My God, forgive me. I had no idea you were here. I didn't see you come into the kitchen. How embarrassing for you to hear me yelling like that. Good afternoon, ma'am." I offered him a faint smile. The first honest smile I'd given all day. "Good afternoon, Marcos. You don't have to apologize. I know perfectly well how the kitchen gets during main service. And I know exactly who you're talking about. The woman in the emerald green dress is my daughter, Luciana." Marcos opened his mouth, unable to make a sound. He looked at Sylvia for help, but the manager only nodded slowly, confirming the social nightmare they had just stumbled into. "Miss Norma, I didn't know. I truly apologize. If I had known it was your family, if you had known it was my family, you would have done exactly the same thing, Marcos, because you are a professional and your food is impeccable," I interrupted, raising a hand. "The problem isn't your duck orange. The problem is that my daughter and her husband need to humiliate the staff to feel important in front of their current guests. I myself was a victim of their need for control 10 minutes ago when they sent me to sit in the back because I wasn't elegant enough for their table." Marcos pressed his lips together and his dark eyes gleamed with an indignation he didn't try to hide. He remembered Arthur. He remembered how we treated our people. "What do you want us to do, Miss Norma?" the chef asked, his voice now firm, devoid of any apology. He was ready for orders, loyal to the only real authority in that building. I looked at the contract documents spread across the desk. I thought of the effort of my hands sewing Emilio's gown in the pre-dawn hours. I thought of Stephen's arrogance, signing a worthless promissory note built on lies and extortion. I thought of Luciana's look when she told me I didn't fit in with the important people. The emotional clock had struck zero. Patience, that virtue I had cultivated for 72 years, dried up instantly, replaced by an absolute determination. I slowly stood up, placing both hands on the mahogany surface. I looked at Sylvia, then at Marcos. I had my two executive allies in the same room, administrative authority and operational authority. "Sylvia," I said, pointing to the contract with my index finger. "Clause 8 of the master lease agreement, the one San Miguel Holdings has signed with your agency, stipulates that the property owner has the unilateral and unappealable right to suspend any ongoing event if fraud, non-payment, or risk to the prestige of the facilities is detected. Is that correct?" Sylvia nodded, her eyes fixed on me. "That's correct, Miss Norma. It's a standard asset protection clause." "Perfect. And the contract Stephen signed with you stipulates that the agency can immediately cancel service if the client exhibits abusive behavior towards staff or if financial information provided for credit was falsified. Is that also correct?" "Yes, ma'am. Clause 4, subsection B." "Good. Then we're going to apply both," I declared, my voice sounding cold and metallic in the office's silence. "Sylvia, I want you to draft the event cancellation order right now due to non-payment and fraud in the guarantees." "Marcos." The chef straightened almost to attention. "Yes, ma'am?" "Go back to the kitchen. Stop main course service. No one else eats. Turn off the ovens. Remove the trays from the service stations and tell your waitstaff to retreat to the break area. The Valdez family event is officially over." Marcos allowed himself a half smile, a fierce gesture of repressed satisfaction. He nodded, turned on his heel, and left the office, closing the door behind him with much more gentleness than he had used on his way in. Sylvia was already furiously typing on her computer, preparing the legal document that would back my decision. I stood by the window, watching the wind move the branches of the ash trees Arthur had planted. The machinery was in motion. The trap, woven with the very threads of my daughter's arrogance, was about to close in on them. We didn't have to wait long for the impact. Barely 5 minutes after Marcos left, the sound of high heels violently clicking against the hallway carpet announced the arrival of the storm. The office door burst open with such force that it slammed against the rubber stopper on the wall. There stood Luciana. Her emerald silk dress seemed even tighter from the tension in her body. Her face, usually a mask of control and expensive cosmetics, was disfigured by impatient rage. She had abandoned her political guest to come and resolve the problem with her own hands, convinced that the entire world should bend to her whims. "Sylvia!" Luciana screamed. storming into the office without even glancing towards the window. "What the hell is going on with your staff? We've been waiting 20 minutes for our main courses. The chef is insubordinate and refuses to come out. And now the waiters are disappearing from the ballroom. The mayor is asking me if there's a problem. I demand you fix this immediately, or I'll make sure that Luciana stops dead." The words died in her throat. Finally, her peripheral vision caught me standing by the window. She slowly turned her head, as if she couldn't believe what her eyes were showing her. The silence that followed was dense, heavy, loaded with decades of misunderstandings and disdain. Luciana looked me up and down, scanning my grey dress, my black handbag on the mahogany desk, and my relaxed posture in front of the general manager of the agency. "Mom?" she whispered, blinking rapidly. "What are you doing in here? Why aren't you at the table I assigned you? What are you doing hiding in the offices, bothering the manager in the middle of a crisis?" I didn't answer immediately. I let her confusion grow, letting the poison of her own questions settle in the room's air. I approached the desk with calculated slowness. Sylvia, maintaining a glacial composure, printed the cancellation sheet, stamped it with the agency's official seal, and slid it towards my side of the desk along with a black ink pen. I took the pen, looking directly into Luciana's eyes. There was no trace of the complacent affection she had always taken for granted. There was only the gaze of a woman who had decided to stop being invisible. "I'm not hidden, Luciana," I replied with a calm that seemed to destabilize her even further. "And I'm not bothering the manager. I'm doing my job. Something you and your husband forgot to do when you decided to throw a party with someone else's money in a property that doesn't belong to you." Luciana frowned, taking a step back, as if my words were a foreign language she couldn't decipher. "What are you talking about? What job?" "Mom, please stop talking nonsense and go back to your seat. I don't have time for your dramas. I have 200 important guests waiting for their food." "No, Luciana," I said, leaning over the desk and signing the cancellation document with a firm, definitive stroke. "You no longer have guests, and there's no food. Because as the absolute owner of this estate and San Miguel Holdings, I have just cancelled your event." I let go of the pen. The sound of the plastic against the wood echoed like a gunshot in the office's silence. Luciana looked at the paper, then at Sylvia, and finally at me. And for the first time in her life, absolute terror replaced arrogance in her eyes. The sound of the plastic pen clattering against the mahogany wood echoed like a solitary gunshot in the absolute silence of the office. Luciana looked at the paper I had just signed, then at Sylvia, and finally fixed her eyes on me. For the first time in her 45 years of life, pure, unadulterated terror replaced arrogance in her gaze. Her pupils dilated, frantically searching for a logical explanation, a loophole to escape the reality that had just collapsed onto her shoulders. Her hands, perfectly manicured and adorned with diamond rings her husband hadn't finished paying for, clutched the edge of the desk with such force that her knuckles turned white. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a choked sound emerged from her throat, an inarticulate stammer, completely devoid of the educated, pretentious diction she so painstakingly maintained in front of her friends. "What? What is this?" she finally managed to articulate, her voice trembling, high-pitched and stripped of any authority. "What kind of sick joke is this, Sylvia? My mother has no authority to sign anything here. My father was the owner of everything, and when he passed, the estate was placed in a family trust. She only receives a pension. She only used to sew the tablecloths back in the old days." I didn't move. I remained standing, my back straight, my hands firmly planted on the cool surface of the desk. I felt no anger, no hot, uncontrolled fury that clouds judgment. What I felt was a deep, dark, heavy pity. Pity to see how my own daughter, the child whose hair I had brushed and whose scraped knees I had mended, had rewritten our family's history to fit her narrative of contempt. To her, I was never the co-founder. I was never the woman who designed the blueprints for this very estate by candlelight when the electricity was cut in our first place. To Luciana, I had always been an accessory, a useful tool to be put away in a drawer when important guests arrived. Sylvia adjusted her glasses on the bridge of her nose, maintaining a glacial, professional composure that contrasted brutally with my daughter's nervous breakdown. "Mrs. Valdez?" I I suggest you choose your words carefully, Sylvia said with a neutral but sharp, glass-like tone. Miss Norma does not receive any pension. Miss Norma is the chairwoman of the board and the majority shareholder of San Miguel Holdings, with 98% of the shares in her name. The remaining 2% belongs to a trust fund in the name of her grandson, Daniel. Mr. Arthur left very precise instructions before his passing. You do not feature in the ownership structure of this land, this building, or the company that leases the facilities to us. Legally, your mother is the sole owner of every square inch of Fresno Manor, and she has just exercised her contractual right to cancel your event due to financial risk and abusive behavior. Luciana recoiled from the desk as if the wood had burned her palms. She took an erratic step backward, stumbling awkwardly on the edge of the thick industrial carpet. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, inflating and deflating the emerald silk of her designer dress at an alarming rate. She shook her head repeatedly, as if the mere physical movement could erase the words she had just heard. No, that's impossible. Dad wouldn't have done that. Dad adored me. Dad knew Stephen and I needed support for our projects. He wouldn't have left me out. You're manipulating her, Luciana shrieked, pointing an accusing finger that visibly trembled. You're senile, Mom. You don't know what you're signing. You're ruining your own great-grandson's christening over a stupid whim because you were offended by a chair. You're an old, resentful, envious woman. The words bounced off the office walls, filling the space with the accumulated toxicity of decades of unspoken silences. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. The memory of my late husband, Arthur, appeared in my mind with overwhelming clarity. I remembered the rainy night we signed the corporate documents 15 years ago. We were sitting at the kitchen table of our old house. Arthur had his glasses on the tip of his nose and held my hand over the paper. Our daughter has an empty heart and loose hands, Norma. He had told me that night with a sadness that etched into the wrinkles of his face. We love her, but we gave her so much comfort that we crippled her character. If we leave her in control of our efforts, she'll lose everything in a year trying to impress people who don't care about her. And worse, she'll let that good-for-nothing Stephen drag her to ruin. Everything stays in your name, my old girl. You are the wall. I had paid their debts in secret. I had sewn their clothes so they could fake a status they didn't have. I had cleaned up their messes in the dark of early morning. But the wall had grown tired of taking blows. I opened my eyes and met Luciana's frantic gaze. Your father loved you deeply, Luciana, I said, my voice so low and firm that it forced her to stop screaming to hear me. He loved you so much that he decided to protect you from your own vanity. And no, I'm not senile. My mind is clearer than ever in my life. And this isn't about a chair. It's not about you sending me to the back of the ballroom as if I were a garbage bag you didn't want your friends to see. It's about this. I held up the original event contract and the promissory note Stephen had signed. I held it in the air under the white light of Sylvia's desk lamp. It's about your husband coming to my house, the house your father and I built carrying sacks of cement, and signing a fraudulent document. You agreed to pay a fortune you don't have, using a false 90-day credit backed by a technically bankrupt construction company. You came to extort my manager, threatening her with political connections to get a free luxury party. You used the sacrament of my great-grandson, an innocent baby, as a grotesque excuse to stage a play and deceive a mayor into signing a contract that would save you from ruin. Luciana paled so dramatically that the expensive makeup on her cheeks suddenly looked like a wax mask peeling off her skin. She swallowed hard. She knew I had hit the mark. She knew her financial house of cards was collapsing in real time before her eyes. Mom, please. Her voice cracked, instantly losing all its haughtiness, transforming into the pathetic plea of a cornered animal. The mayor is out there. The investors from Monterey are at table 2. If the food doesn't come out, if they find out the event is cancelled, we're dead. Stephen needs that municipal contract. If he doesn't get it, the bank will foreclose on our house next month. We'll lose everything. We'll be on the street. How can you do this to your own family? How can you be so cruel? You were already dead, Luciana, I replied relentlessly, not allowing pity to soften my resolve. You just wanted to use my money and my property to pay for the coffin and make the funeral look nice. And as for family, Don't you dare use that word with me. Family doesn't banish a mother to the staff table because her dress doesn't have a French label. Family doesn't throw a mended lace gown in your face at 3 a.m. without even saying thank you. You cut me out of your family a long time ago, the day you decided my humble origins were a stain on your social resume. I'm just formalizing the divorce. Before Luciana could let out the desperate sob that was building in her throat, the violent sound of the doorknob turning broke the tension in the office. The heavy oak door swung open with such force that it slammed against the rubber stopper on the wall with a dull thud. It was Stephen. My son-in-law entered the room like an enraged bull, sweating profusely in his expensive wool suit that now felt too small for him due to stress. The silk tie he had so presumptuously adjusted in the mirror moments before now hung loose from his neck. His face, usually practiced to show a fake corporate geniality, was red and twisted into a grimace of impatient fury. He didn't look towards the corner where I was standing. His tunnel vision was completely focused on Sylvia and his wife. "Luciana, what the hell are you doing hiding in here?" Stephen bellowed, waving his arms in the air. "I've been trying to keep the mayor entertained with stupid anecdotes for 20 minutes. The tables are empty. I went to the kitchen, and the ovens are off. The waiters are sitting around drinking water. It's a goddamn mutiny." Stephen advanced towards the desk, planting both hands on the wood and thrusting his face towards Sylvia in a physically intimidating, disgusting, and cowardly posture. Listen to me, you fifth-rate employee," he spat at Sylvia, veins bulging in his neck. "I don't know what kind of union problem you have in this dump, but you are going to get to that kitchen right now and force your chef to serve the dishes. And if you don't, I swear to God that tomorrow morning I will use all my influence in the municipality to revoke your operating license. I will sink this agency, and I will make sure you never work in this city again. I am Stephen Valdez, and no one humiliates me like this." Sylvia didn't flinch, didn't move an inch. She simply clasped her hands in her lap and looked at Stephen with an expression of absolute boredom, the same expression one reserves for a spoiled child throwing a tantrum in a supermarket. It was then that Stephen, not receiving the immediate submission he expected, turned his head, seeking support, and saw me. He saw me standing there, calm, with my black handbag hanging from my forearm and my grey dress perfectly smoothed. His brain seemed to short-circuit for a second, his brow furrowed, confused by my presence in that administrative sanctuary reserved for the supposed owners of the world. "And what are you doing here, Norma?" he asked, using my first name with that casual disrespect that had always characterized him. There was no miss or madam. To him, I was always the annoying mother-in-law who didn't fit in. "I told you clearly this morning to stay away from the main table. Did you come to whine to the manager because you didn't like your seat? For God's sake, Luciana, get your mother out of here. Take her to the kitchen and give her a bowl of soup, but get her out of my sight. I don't have time to deal with this woman's inferiority complexes while my career is on the line." The silence that followed his words was dense, almost solid. You could cut it with a knife. Luciana put both hands to her face, covering her mouth as if to stifle a scream of terror. She knew her husband's words had just sealed their fate, definitively and irrevocably. I didn't let Luciana speak. I didn't let her protect him. I took a step forward, closing the distance between Stephen and me. My low heels made no sound, but my presence suddenly seemed to fill every corner of the immense office. "I'm not here complaining about a chair, Stephen," I said with a glacial, deliberate tone, pronouncing each syllable with the precision of an executioner sharpening his axe. "I'm here because the manager needed my signature to execute an urgent administrative procedure." Stephen let out a harsh, contemptuous laugh. He ran a hand through his slicked back hair, looking at me as if I had lost my mind. "Your signature? What the hell does this agency need the signature of an old woman who spends her time knitting baby blankets for? Are you going to authorize them to buy more yarn? Luciana, please get this woman out of here before I call security." "They needed my signature," I continued, ignoring his interruption and raising my voice just enough to dominate the room. "Because the lease agreement that allows this agency to operate on this property stipulates that only the absolute owner of Fresno Manor can order the immediate cancellation of an ongoing event due to fraud and falsification guarantees." Stephen blinked. The mocking smile froze on his face, transforming into a grotesque grimace. He looked at Sylvia, expecting the manager to burst out laughing and deny my madness. But Sylvia only nodded slowly, holding up the document I had just signed and showing it to him directly. Miss Norma is the majority shareholder of San Miguel Holdings and the legal owner of this property, Mr. Valdez, Sylvia confirmed with lethal clarity. And she has just exercised her right to cancel your event. The ovens are off, the service staff has been withdrawn, there will be no food, no drinks, no music, your party is over. The physical impact of the words on Stephen's body was fascinating to observe. It was like watching a building implode in slow motion. His shoulders slumped, his chest deflated, and his legs seemed to tremble beneath his fine wool pants. He staggered back a step, clumsily bumping into the leather visitor's chair. He looked at Luciana, seeking to deny the nightmare. "Luciana," Stephen murmured, his voice hoarse and broken. "Tell me this is a joke. Tell me your mother isn't. Tell me Arthur didn't leave her." "It's true, Stephen," Luciana choked out, dropping her hands from her face, revealing smeared makeup and bloodshot eyes. "It's all hers. It was always hers. The company, the land, the ballroom. She just cancelled everything on us." Stephen collapsed heavily into the leather chair. The air seemed to leave his lungs all at once. The arrogant architect with the distinguished surname, the man who, 10 minutes ago, had swaggered in front of the mayor and humiliated my employees, had been reduced to a trembling sack of flesh in a matter of seconds. He loosened his tie even further, as if he were suddenly short of oxygen in the air-conditioned office. Silence reigned again, interrupted only by my daughter's choked sobs and my son-in-law's erratic breathing. I took my time observing them. For years they had built a fortress of lies and appearances, funding their contempt for me with the sweat of my own labor. And now, with a simple signature and a few words, I had brought their walls crumbling to their foundations. Suddenly, the lowest, most crawling instinct for survival took hold of Stephen. He sprang to his feet, but this time, there was no aggression in his movements. There was desperation. He walked towards me, hunched, diminished, trying to force a conciliatory smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. "Norma, sweetie pie," he began to say, raising his hands in a gesture of peaceful surrender. The diminutive caused a deep revulsion in my stomach. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding, a communication error. That's all. Luciana must have gotten confused with the tables. You know we adore you. You're the matriarch of this family. Please, we can't do this today. Not today." "Don't call me sweetie pie, Stephen," I cut him off, my voice cracking like a whip. "And there's no misunderstanding. Your only mistake was believing you could pay for a party of 200 guests with a 90-day promissory note that isn't even worth the paper it's printed on. I know the numbers of your construction company, Stephen. I know you're on the verge of bankruptcy. I know you used this christening to fake solvency in front of the mayor and beg for a municipal contract to save your skin. You tried to use my property to finance your fraud." Stephen paled further. The fact that I knew the dark secrets of his accounting completely broke his spirit. He fell to his knees. Literally, the great Mr. Valdez knelt on the grey office carpet, clasping his hands in front of his chest. "Please, Norma, I beg you," he whimpered, real tears of panic welling in his eyes. "If the mayor walks out that door without having eaten, offended by the treatment, he'll never give me the signature. If I don't sign the public works contract, the bank will foreclose on me next week. We'll lose the house, we'll lose the company cars. I'll even drag Daniel down. I made him sign as collateral for a bridge loan. If I fall, your grandson, Daniel, and his wife, Marina, will also lose their home. Will you leave your newborn great-grandson homeless? Is that what you want? To destroy your own blood for a fit of pride? Using the baby. Using Daniel and Marina as human shields was the lowest, most predictable move of a cornered coward. I felt a pang of pain thinking of Daniel. My grandson was a good boy, hard-working and honest, but he had inherited his mother's weakness for being manipulated by authority figures. Stephen had convinced him to mortgage his future to save the construction company's bad decisions. I took a deep breath, keeping my mind clear. I wouldn't let emotional blackmail divert me from my course. "Daniel and Marina will be fine," I replied, looking down at him with absolute coldness. I myself will take care of settling my grandson's debt first thing Monday morning. I have sufficient funds to protect those who are truly worthwhile in this family. They won't lose their house, but you, Stephen, you will lose every last fake penny you pretend to have. Your papier-mâché empire ends today." Luciana rushed over and knelt beside her husband, clinging to Stephen's arm while looking at me with pleading eyes. "Mom, I beg you. I'm sorry about the table. I'm sorry for everything. I was stupid. I was ungrateful. I admit it. I'll kneel before you if you want, but don't expose us out there. Not in front of all those people. Just tell them to turn on the ovens. Let them serve the damn duck. Let's cut the cake. Let's take the official photo, and I swear we'll leave the city tomorrow. If you want, I'll sign over the shares of the construction company. I'll give you whatever you ask. Just let us maintain our dignity in front of the mayor. Just one more hour of charade, I beg you." I looked at my daughter and son-in-law, kneeling on my office floor, begging for the trappings of an illusion they themselves had destroyed. They had spent their lives trampling on those they considered inferior, and now they begged for mercy with the same mouths that had once spewed venom. The poetic justice of the scene was undeniable, but it brought me no joy. It only confirmed what Arthur had always known. They were rotten to the core. Slowly, I bent down, but not to comfort them. I extended my hand, took my black handbag from the desk, and firmly slung it over my forearm. I straightened up, adjusting the folds of my self-made grey dress. "No, Luciana, there will be no more charades. I will not use my workers' food to fuel your husband's fraud," I declared, my voice unwavering, resonating in the walls. "You wanted an event for important people, and the important people are already sitting, waiting." Stephen looked up, confused, his face drenched in tears and sweat. "What? What are you going to do, Norma? Are you going to tell them yourself that there's no food?" "No, Stephen," I said, turning towards the solid oak door. "All three of us are going back out." Luciana awkwardly stood up, pulling on her husband's arm to help him rise. "Go back out, Mum? We can't go into the ballroom without the waiters. They'll bombard us with questions. The mayor will demand to know what's going on. It will be a public humiliation." I paused, my hand resting on the polished brass doorknob. I turned my head slightly over my shoulder and looked at them with a calmness that must have seemed absolutely terrifying. "You are going to walk back to your beautiful main table adorned with orchids," I ordered, with the irrefutable authority of one who holds all the cards. "You are going to sit next to the mayor and the investors from Monterey, and I am going to walk to the plastic table by the kitchen door. Exactly where you decided was my place, Luciana." "But the plates are empty," Stephen stammered, trembling. "People will start to complain." "Exactly," I replied, opening the heavy oak door and letting the distant hum of 200 impatient guests flood the hallway again. And from my seat in the back, I will enjoy every second watching the important people discover that their hosts can't even offer them a glass of water. Move it. Time to face the music. The administrative hallway seemed to have doubled in length. I walked with measured steps, feeling the firmness of the industrial carpet beneath my low-heeled shoes. Behind me, the sound of my daughter's agitated breathing and my son-in-law's clumsy shuffling formed a pathetic funeral march. I didn't look back to check if they were following. I knew they were. Fear has a very particular way of chaining people, and at that moment I held the end of the chain. As I passed the black and white photograph of Arthur and me in front of the estate's rubble, I felt a cold draft run down the back of my neck. It was as if the building itself was breathing, preparing to expel the infection that had tried to parasitize its foundations. The swinging doors connecting to the kitchen appeared before us. I pushed them open with both hands. The contrast with the chaos I had witnessed barely half an hour earlier was so brutal that Luciana, behind me, let out a choked gasp. The kitchen, the pulsating heart of any event, was clinically dead. The immense stainless steel industrial stoves, which had previously roared with blue flames and emitted the intoxicating aroma of duck, l'orange, and spices, were now off, cold and silent. The powerful lights of the extractor hoods had been dimmed to half their intensity, plunging the immense space into a metallic gloom. Marcos, the executive chef, stood in front of the central island with his arms crossed over his robust chest. He no longer held the stained kitchen towel in his hand, He had changed into a completely clean, white chef's jacket. Around him, the entire brigade of cooks and waiters was lined up in absolute silence. They had removed all the serving trays. The avocado and lobster timbales that Luciana had scornfully returned were being methodically thrown into compost bins by 2 kitchen assistants. It was the very image of the end, an end that Stephen refused to accept. He tried to reclaim a shred of his shattered authority. He stepped forward, separating himself from Luciana, and pointed a trembling finger at Marcos, invading the chef's space. "You! Listen closely. Cook!" Stephen stammered, though his voice completely lacked the volume and arrogance of a few minutes ago. "I order you to turn on those ovens right now. Get the food out, whatever it is. Throw some steaks on the grill, get some bread out. Whatever you have, I'll pay you double your day's wages in cash if you save me from this." Marcos didn't even blink. He didn't move a single muscle of his weathered face. His dark eyes darted over Stephen's shoulder and locked directly onto mine, seeking the only confirmation that mattered to him in that entire building. I held his gaze and slowly shook my head. A movement of barely an inch was enough. "The kitchen is closed, Mr. Valdez," Marcus replied, his deep voice resonating in the immaculate steel walls. "And my loyalty cannot be bought with money you don't have. Gather your guests and vacate the ballroom." Stephen opened his mouth to retort, but the sound of a porcelain plate breaking in the trash bin made him shrink in on himself. Luciana took his arm, pulling him towards the service hallway. She was terrified of the employees she had humiliated all morning. Now she knew they all held more power than she did in this house. I walked past them, opening the door that led to the staff break area, just behind the black velvet curtain that separated our world from the main ballroom. "Go to your table," I ordered, without raising my voice, stopping just at the threshold. "The mayor is waiting for you. You have a role to play in front of the important people. Don't make him wait any longer." Luciana looked at me with tears in her eyes. Her black mascara formed 2 dirty streaks down her cheeks. She clung to my arm, a desperate gesture that reminded me of when she was 5 years old and broke a vase in the house, wanting me to fix the broken pieces. "Mom, please, don't make me go out there. I can't face them. They'll know we're a fraud. They'll know we have nothing. They'll destroy me at the club, at the meetings. The mayor's wife will tear me apart. Let me leave through the back door. Let me take Daniel and Emilio, and we'll all go. Say there was a medical emergency. Say I fainted, whatever it takes. But don't force me to face those people empty-handed." I released her grip with a firm but gentle movement. I looked her up and down, observing the emerald silk dress that constricted her breathing, the jewelry bought on credit to impress strangers, the stiff hairstyle that was now beginning to crumble from the cold sweat on her forehead. "Respect isn't demanded with shouts, Luciana. It's earned in silence," I said, pronouncing each word with glacial clarity. "And I'm not imposing humiliation on you. You built it yourself, brick by brick, when you decided that appearances were worth more than loyalty. You wanted an exclusive place for important people. Now, go occupy it. Go out into the ballroom." I didn't give them time to react. I pulled back the heavy velvet curtain and stepped into the dazzling light of the main ballroom. The murmur of 200 impatient people hit me like a wave of physical heat. The string quartet had stopped playing, probably because their contract time had expired or because they noticed, with the keen instinct of event musicians, that something was terribly wrong. In the absence of music, the clinking of silver cutlery against empty crystal glasses and the hum of complaints formed a tense, almost electric atmosphere. The air conditioning was still on full blast, but the air felt heavy, suffocating. I walked directly towards the small round table against the wall, my designated place in exile. The metal folding chair was still there with my grey wool coat folded over the back, exactly as I had left it. I sat down slowly. The metallic creak under my weight was the only sound that kept me company in that dark corner. From this strategic position, the view was unbeatable. The ballroom looked like an immense chessboard where the pieces had just realized the game was rigged. To my left, I watched Luciana and Stephen emerge from behind the curtain. They walked stiffly, as if they had wooden planks strapped to their backs. Luciana had tried to wipe away her smeared mascara, but had only managed to spread a greyish shadow under her eyes, giving her the sickly appearance of a jewel-adorned ghost. Stephen buttoned his suit jacket, trying to project an image of control, that crumbled with each hesitant step he took towards the center of the dance floor. As they performed their walk of shame, a young waiter in immaculate white gloves approached my table. It was the same young man I had crossed paths with earlier, the one who had stumbled over my chair leg. He carried a small silver tray. With a silent bow filled with genuine respect, he placed a steaming porcelain cup in front of me. Chef Marcos asked me to bring you your chamomile tea with honey, miss. Norma, the young man murmured, keeping his head slightly bowed. He said it would help you enjoy the show. I managed a half smile, taking the cup by its delicate handle. The warmth of the tea seeped into my fingers, comforting my tired joints. Thank you, son. Tell Marcos he's absolutely right. The waiter nodded, took a step back, and stood by the kitchen door, hands clasped behind his back, assuming the posture of a sentinel guarding his queen. I took a sip of tea and fixed my gaze on table 1, the center of the ballroom, the altar of the vein. Stephen and Luciana finally reached their seats. Mayor Mendoza, a burly man with a flushed face and thinning hair, sat to the right of the head of the table. He had been drumming his thick fingers on the linen tablecloth for over half an hour. Beside him, his wife, the same woman Luciana had entered the church with, completely ignoring me, fanned herself frantically with the parchment paper menu. Across from them, the 3 investors from Monterey, men in impeccably grey suits, looked at their cell phones with expressions ranging from absolute boredom to open irritation. The moment Stephen touched the back of his chair, Mayor Mendoza stopped drumming his fingers and turned to him. Although the ballroom was immense, the acoustics Arthur and I had designed were perfect. Voices carried easily, and the tense silence of the other guests amplified any conversation in the center. Valdez, for God's sake, can you tell me what's going on here? The mayor demanded, his raspy voice cutting through the ballroom air like a saw. We've been waiting 45 minutes for the main course. The glasses are empty, and the waiters have mysteriously disappeared. My wife's blood sugar is plummeting, and the investors have flights to catch tonight. Is this the famous hospitality you boasted so much about at the golf club? Stephen swallowed so visibly that I could see his Adam's apple move from my table in the back. He loosened his tie, a pathetic gesture of pure nervousness, and tried to force his corporate smile. It was a resounding failure. His lips trembled as if he were about to cry. Mr. Mayor, I offer my sincerest apologies, Stephen stammered, placing both hands on the table to prevent the trembling of his body from being evident to the diners. We've had a small technical inconvenience in the kitchen. Nothing to worry about, I assure you. A fuse, I think. They're fixing it now. The food will be out any moment. The mayor's wife let out a dry chuckle, devoid of any humor. She dropped the menu on the table with disdain. A fuse? Stephen, darling, I've organized charity events at this estate dozens of times. I know the operating agency. They have backup generators that could light up an entire stadium in 3 seconds. Don't give me cheap excuses. The service here is impeccable. If there's no food, it's because someone made a monumental mistake, and I don't think it was the electrician. Luciana, seated across from the mayor, tried to intervene. Her voice, usually sharp, commanding, and full of self-importance, came out as a cracked whisper. Margarita, please. I assure you everything is under control. The chef is a bit temperamental. You know how these culinary artists are. They demand perfection and take their time. They'll serve right away. I promise you. One of the investors from Monterey, a man with graying hair and a hawk-like gaze, put his phone in the inner pocket of his jacket and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He didn't look at Luciana. He fixed his eyes directly on Stephen. With all due respect, Mrs. Valdez, my time is money, the investor said, with a heavy, wonderfully direct northern accent. We flew from Nuevo León exclusively because your husband assured us that today we would celebrate the signing of the new municipal development with the mayor. But all I see is a paralyzed party, empty tables, and a sweating host. If your construction company handles public works with the same efficiency with which it organizes a family christening, I doubt very much that we want to risk our capital with you. The impact of those words was devastating. Stephen turned pale, the color of old ash. The contract that was going to save him from bankruptcy was evaporating before his eyes. destroyed by the very people he had tried to impress at the cost of my dignity and my legacy. The tension at the main table began to radiate to the rest of the ballroom like an invisible gas. At table 3, I saw my grandson Daniel stand up with little Emilio in his arms. The baby had started to cry, irritated by the muffled noise, the heat of the suits, and the lack of attention. Marina, his wife, looked terrified towards her in-laws, sensing that disaster was imminent. Poor Marina. It wasn't her fault for the nest of vipers she had married into. I mentally promised myself that I would call her the next day to assure her that the roof over her son's head was safe, no matter what happened to her father-in-law's construction company. Mayor Mendoza, having finally lost what little patience he had left, raised a hand in the air and snapped his fingers, calling one of his assistants, a young man in a dark suit who was standing by the main entrance of the ballroom. "Roberto, go to the kitchen immediately," the mayor ordered, completely ignoring Stephen's presence, treating him no longer as a partner but as an annoyance. "Find the manager of this place and tell her the city mayor demands an explanation for this disaster. And if they don't have the food ready in 5 minutes, tell my driver to start the SUV. We're leaving." The assistant nodded and began to walk quickly towards the swinging doors, in my direction. Stephen jumped out of his chair, extending his arms in a desperate attempt to stop him. No, it's not necessary, Mr. Mayor," Stephen shouted, finally losing control of the volume of his voice. Several guests from nearby tables turned their heads, alarmed by the architect's hysterical tone. "I'll go myself. I'll fix this right now. I know the owners. I have influence in this place." But it was too late. The mayor's assistant passed right by my table, ignored me completely, pushed open the kitchen doors, and disappeared into the dim service hallway. Those were the longest 30 seconds of Stephen Valdez's life. He stood there, paralyzed beside his chair, his arms hanging uselessly at his sides, his gaze vacant, watching the seconds on the invisible clock of his ruin tick down to 0. Luciana covered her face with both hands. She no longer cared about her makeup, her posture, or her diamonds. Panic had completely consumed her. She was huddled in her luxury chair, wishing she could become invisible. The swinging doors opened again. The mayor's assistant stepped out. Walked with a swift, firm pace towards the main table, and leaned in to whisper something into Mendoza's ear. I watched, fascinated, as the politician's face shifted from pure irritation to incredulity, and finally, to a choleric indignation that tinged his cheeks purple. Mendoza placed both hands on the table and slowly stood up. His chair scraped against the marble floor with a violent screech that echoed throughout the ballroom, instantly silencing the few remaining conversations. The silence that fell over the room was absolute, suffocating. 200 pairs of eyes were fixed on the table of important people. "A fuse, Valdez," the mayor roared. His voice bounced off the high ceilings and the crystal chandeliers Arthur had so painstakingly hung. "My assistant just went into the kitchen. The stoves are off. The service stations are empty. There isn't a single plate of food being prepared in this building. The waiters are sitting around drinking water. The cleaning staff is packing things up. Do you think I'm an idiot?" Stephen recoiled a step, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of supplication, as if trying to stop an avalanche with open palms. "Mr. Mayor, I swear there's a terrible misunderstanding. This operating agency is incompetent. They're extorting me. They're sabotaging me out of political envy. I paid for this event. I'm an intimate friend of the owners of this estate." That was the signal, the exact phrase that would trigger the final destruction. Before the mayor could respond to Stephen's ridiculous lie, the sound of firm, rhythmic heels broke the silence of the ballroom. From the side hallway connected to the administrative offices emerged Sylvia Montenegro. The general manager walked with the unshakable posture of a general entering an already conquered battlefield. In her hands, she carried an open black leather folder, displaying the cancellation document with my still fresh signature. Sylvia didn't stop at the edge of the dance floor. She walked directly towards table 1, cutting through the sea of stunned guests with determined steps. Her face was a mask of lethal professionalism, impassive amidst the social chaos. She stopped 6 feet from the main table, facing the mayor and a Stephen, who looked on the verge of a heart attack. "Good afternoon, everyone," Sylvia announced. She didn't use a microphone, but her clear, authoritative voice, trained to manage crowds and resolve crises, was heard perfectly in every corner of the ballroom. "My name is Sylvia Montenegro, General Manager of the Fresno Manor Operating Agency. I deeply regret the confusion and discomfort you are experiencing this afternoon." Mayor Mendoza crossed his arms over his chest, looking at her sternly, demanding answers with the mere posture of his heavy body. "Miss Montenegro, I demand an immediate explanation. Why has the service for this event been halted? Is what Mr. Valdez says about an extortion attempt by your company against his family true?" Sylvia offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A cold, surgical smile, designed to cut the lie at its root. She turned her head slightly to look at Stephen, who was trembling so violently that the cutlery at his place clinked against the crystal glasses. "No, Mr. Mayor, there is no extortion on our part," Sylvia replied, raising the black folder so that all present at the main table could see the legal documents and the official seal. "The service for this event has been definitively and unilaterally cancelled in strict adherence to our safety protocols. And the reason is very simple: fraud and falsification of financial guarantees by the host present here today." A deafening murmur erupted in the ballroom. 200 people from local high society held their breath at the same time. The wives of politicians brought their hands to their mouths. The investors from Monterey looked at each other, nodding slowly, confirming their worst suspicions about the construction company's solvency. Luciana openly sobbed, hiding her face in the imported linen tablecloth she had so demanded to have. "It's a lie!" Stephen shouted in a final, desperate attempt to save his prestige from the ashes. His voice broke into a high-pitched, embarrassing squeak that echoed throughout the venue. "I submitted a corporate promissory note. My construction company has plenty of funds. You are slandering me in front of my guests, and you will pay for this. I demand the owner of this place come out right now. Tell your bosses to show their faces. I demand to speak with the owners of San Miguel Holdings, so they can fire you this instant." Sylvia closed the leather folder with a crisp snap. She held Stephen's gaze for 3 long seconds, letting the echo of his pathetic screams completely fade under the constant hum of the air conditioning. Then, with a blood-chilling calm, Sylvia raised her right hand, extended her arm, and pointed directly towards the back of the ballroom, towards the small round table without a tablecloth, away from the warm lights of the center, towards the metal folding chair located next to the swinging kitchen doors, towards the area where only invisible people were supposed to go towards me. "The owner of San Miguel Holdings doesn't have to come from anywhere, Mr. Valdez," Sylvia said, and her voice resonated with the force of a hammer striking the final nail in my son-in-law's coffin. "The absolute owner of this estate, this company, and the land you are standing on has been present all along. It was she who personally ordered the cancellation of your event, because important people, Mr. Valdez, do not pay for their parties with worthless promissory notes. The effect was immediate and absolute, as if they were connected by a single invisible thread. The 200 guests, Mayor Mendoza, the stern investors from the north, my grandson Daniel, and finally Stephen, turned their heads in unison. A sea of pale, confused faces turned towards the back of the ballroom, searching for the figure of power who had just crushed the great architect Valdez in front of the entire city. And there I was, the woman in the self-made grey dress, the old woman they hadn't deemed worthy enough to share their table, the mother they had hidden with the staff so her origins wouldn't mar the official christening photographs. I didn't stand up, I didn't shout, I didn't need to make any dramatic gesture or deliver a victory speech. I simply remained seated in my folding chair, holding my porcelain cup. With both hands, I held Stephen's terrified gaze from 50 yards away, watching the crushing weight of the truth pulverize his knees. The silence in the ballroom was so deep, so dense, that I could clearly hear the faint tinkle of my spoon brushing the rim of the cup as I took the last sip of my chamomile tea. Stephen Valdez, the man who had sent me to the back for not being important people, was about to discover that the invisible woman in the corner was the sole owner of the sky that had just fallen on him, and I had no intention of helping him pick up the pieces. Mayor Mendoza took a step towards him, breaking the paralysis of the moment. "Is that your mother-in-law, Valdez?" Mendoza asked, gesturing towards me with his chin, a deep disgust deforming his features. "The woman I saw sitting in the third row of the church?" Stephen couldn't answer. His lips moved frantically, but no sound came from his constricted throat. The air in the immense ballroom suddenly seemed to thin out for him. Meanwhile, my gaze, cold, patient, and calculating, held him pinned to the marble floor, a floor I myself had paid for with years of work. His breathing became erratic. His bloodshot eyes frantically searched for an exit among the guests, but all doors were closed, and I held the only key. The game of appearances was over. The illusion had shattered into 1,000 pieces on the main table. Now began the collection of the debt, and I always collected every last penny. Mayor Mendoza didn't wait for Stephen to articulate another word in his defense. His face, which moments earlier radiated the lazy complacency of someone accustomed to being flattered, was now a mask of profound, undisguised disgust. He turned to his wife, offered her his arm with an almost military stiffness, and without a single additional glance at my son-in-law, began to walk towards the main exit of the immense ballroom. The mayor's wife didn't even pick up the silk shawl she had left on the back of her chair. She simply clung to her husband's arm, chin held high, fleeing the epicenter of humiliation, as if the Valdez failure were a contagious disease. The three investors from Monterey were not far behind. The gray-haired man, the one who had spoken so harshly moments before, buttoned his gray suit jacket with deliberate, almost insulting slowness. His hawk-like eyes scanned the main table, pausing for a second on the floral arrangements, and then on Stephen's pale, sweaty face. "Good luck with the bank, Valdez," the Monterey magnate murmured in a neutral tone that cut through the cold air of the ballroom. "And don't bother calling our offices. Our numbers no longer exist for you." That simple, direct phrase was the coup de grace. The exodus began. 200 people from high society, those who had come to drink complimentary champagne and witness the supposed financial coronation of Valdez construction, rose in unison. The sound of heavy mahogany chairs scraping against the polished marble floor was deafening, an industrial cacophony that completely drowned out the sharp sobs that began to erupt from my daughter's throat. Women hurriedly gathered their designer handbags, whispering among themselves at a volume loud enough for the echo to carry their words of contempt to the main table. Men avoided eye contact with Stephen, quickening their pace towards the immense glass lobby, subtly jostling each other to be the first to abandon the sinking ship. Luciana reacted with the blind instinct of a cornered animal. She sprang from her chair, almost tripping on the heavy emerald fabric of her dress, and ran after the wife of the lead investor. "Amelia, please, wait," Luciana pleaded, stretching out her ring-covered hand to try and grab the woman's sleeve. "I swear it's a misunderstanding. I'll invite you for coffee tomorrow and explain everything." "Amelia." The woman named Amelia stopped dead, pulled her arm away with a brusque movement, and glared at my daughter. "Don't touch me, Luciana," the woman said, a voice laden with refined, glacial venom. "And don't call me tomorrow. I find people who pretend to be what they're not unbearable. What a disgrace. Do us all a favor and never set foot in the club again." Luciana stood petrified in the middle of the empty dance floor, her hand extended in the air, watching as the wrought iron gates of the estate swung wide open, spitting her guests out into the gravel parking lot. No one wanted to catch the stench of bankruptcy. No one looked at her with pity. In the artificial world she herself had chosen to inhabit, sudden poverty was the only sin that had no possible redemption. From my metal folding chair, in the farthest, darkest corner of the ballroom, I watched the disintegration of their papier-mâché empire. I didn't lift a finger. I kept both hands wrapped around my porcelain cup, feeling the warmth of the chamomile tea seep into my tired knuckles. Beside me, the young waiter in white gloves remained firm, back straight, hands clasped behind his waist, observing the scene with the silent respect of one who knows he is witnessing pure justice. Through the swinging kitchen doors, I could make out the burly figure of Marcos, the chef, peeking through the glass with a fierce, satisfied smile drawn beneath his thick mustache. In less than 15 minutes, the Fresno Manor ballroom was completely empty of important people. The silence that settled over the place was overwhelming, interrupted only by the low hum of the central air conditioning and the occasional clinking of ice cubes melting in abandoned crystal glasses on the tables. The place looked like the stage of a monumental play just after the audience has left, demanding their tickets back. Stephen was no longer standing. His knees, unable to bear the weight of his own ruin, had completely given way. He was sprawled on the floor, sitting on the cold marble, his back against the central leg of table number 1. He had ripped off his silk tie and thrown it aside. His face was hidden in his hands, and his shoulders trembled with violent spasms, emitting a hoarse, pathetic sob that echoed off the bare walls. All his arrogance, all his calculated cruelty had been reduced to a puddle of sweat and tears under a table he couldn't afford. Luciana slowly walked back towards the head of the table. Her steps were erratic, as if she had suddenly forgotten how to walk in heels. She collapsed onto the empty chair that the mayor had occupied moments before. Her makeup was completely smeared, forming 2 dark, ashen streaks that ran down her cheeks, giving her the appearance of a ghost who had aged instantly. She rested her elbows on the imported linen tablecloth for which she had demanded exclusivity and buried her face in her arms, sobbing openly. Slowly, I placed my porcelain cup on the small round table. I stood up. My grey wool coat was still folded over the back of the metal chair. I didn't put it on. I took my black handbag, slung it firmly over my forearm, and began to walk towards the center of the ballroom. My low-heeled shoes produced a rhythmic, dry, constant sound on the marble. Dab, dab, dab. Each step was another nail in the coffin of their illusions. I passed the abandoned tables, my fingertips brushing the backs of the empty chairs, breathing the cold, clean air of my own house. I stopped 6 feet from the main table. I looked at Stephen, shriveled on the floor like a trampled worm, and then at Luciana, who looked up at the sound of my steps. Her bloodshot eyes looked at me with a mixture of terror and stupid hope, as if she believed that now that the audience was gone, I would revert to being the submissive mother, ready to sweep up the debris of her disaster. "Mum," Luciana whispered, extending a trembling hand towards me. "They're gone. You destroyed us. Are you happy? Are you satisfied with your revenge? You took everything from us in 20 minutes. I didn't raise my voice. There was no need. The silence of the ballroom was my best amplifier. I didn't take anything from you, Luciana, I replied with a glacial calm that seemed to make her shrink in her seat. I only turned on the light. You already had nothing for years. You built a castle on water and intended to use my bones as foundation so it wouldn't sink. You had 45 years to learn to love me, to respect me. Today you learn to fear me. It's a poor substitute, I know, but it's the only feeling you have left to offer me, and I accept it." Stephen lifted his head from the floor. His face was red, swollen, distorted by absolute panic. "Norma!" The bank, he stammered, his voice broken, crawling a little on his knees towards where I stood. "If I don't deposit the advance on the municipal contract by Tuesday, they'll foreclose on the mortgage. They'll take away the house. They'll confiscate the company cars. I'll be on the street. Please, you have the money. San Miguel Holdings has liquidity. Lend it to me from the mortgage. I'll sign anything you want. I'll give you 50% of the construction company." I felt such a strong physical repulsion that I had to clench my jaw to keep from spitting on the floor. "Your construction company isn't worth the weight of the ink you use to print your business cards, Stephen," I declared, looking down at him with absolute coldness. "I don't want your paper company. I don't want your empty promises, and I'm not giving you a single penny of my assets to save the mansion you bought to humiliate others. Tomorrow morning, first thing, you will call your lawyers and declare bankruptcy. It's the only decent way out you have left, and if you try to hide a single asset, I will personally ensure that my lawyers audit every account you have in your name." Before Stephen could let out another shriek of desperation, I heard hurried footsteps approaching from the left side of the ballroom. I turned my head. It was Daniel and Marina. My grandson walked with his jaw clenched, his eyes wide, processing the magnitude of the crater that had just opened beneath his family. Marina walked a step behind, holding little Emilio tightly against her chest. The baby, exhausted by the tension in the air, had finally fallen asleep, oblivious to the collapse of the world around him. Daniel walked past his mother, who was crying at the table, and his father, who was still kneeling on the floor. He walked directly towards me. On his face, there was no anger towards me. There was a belated understanding, a painful clarity that made him look 10 years older all at once. "Grandma," Daniel said, his voice deep and raspy. "I heard what you said to the mayor. I heard the manager. All this time, the estate, the company, it was all yours. Dad lied to all of us." I nodded slowly, keeping my gaze fixed on my grandson's eyes. "Your grandfather and I built it with our hands, Daniel, brick by brick, and I kept it a secret to protect it from the very people who lied to you today." Marina sobbed softly, clutching the baby. The terror in her eyes was evident, a primitive mother's fear of the roof over her child's head being threatened. "Miss Norma, the bridge loan," Marina whispered, her lips trembling. "Stephen made us sign as guarantors 3 months ago. We put our house up as collateral for the construction company. If they go bankrupt, the bank will take our house too. Emilio will be homeless." Daniel bowed his head, ashamed to the core, for having been so naive, for having blindly trusted his father's expensive suits and empty words. I extended my hand and took my grandson's face, lifting his chin firmly to make him look at me. My touch was rough, full of old calluses, but it was charged with a fierce, protective love I would never offer Luciana. "Listen closely, young man," I said, softening my tone of voice just for him. "The debts of arrogance are not inherited by the innocent. Your only fault was being a good son to a man who didn't deserve it. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., I want you in Sylvia's office. My lawyers are already drafting the documents. San Miguel Holdings will buy your debt directly from the bank. I will own your mortgage, and at that very instant, I will sign a full debt forgiveness in Emilio's name. Your house is safe. No one will touch my great-grandson's roof." Marina let out a choked cry of relief. Her knees buckled, and she had to lean on her husband's shoulder. Daniel looked at me with tears in his eyes, and for the first time all afternoon, I saw in him the same frank honesty Arthur had when he was young. "I don't know how to repay you for this, Grandma. I'll work my whole life if I have to." "You've already repaid me, Daniel," I replied, withdrawing my hand from his face. "You'll repay me by breaking the cycle. From today on, you cut all financial ties with your father. You don't sign a single paper for him. You don't lend him a single penny. You don't open the door if he comes looking to hide from his creditors. If you want to save your family, you let him sink alone with his own, do you understand?" Daniel glanced at Stephen, who was still on the floor sobbing, unable even to defend himself from the order I had just given. My grandson nodded firmly, straightened his shoulders, and put a protective arm around Marina. "I understand, Grandma, perfectly." I nodded, satisfied. I turned around, turning my back on the main table, on my daughter and son-in-law, and began to walk towards the staff exit, towards my offices. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back. I left them there alone in the middle of their empty ballroom, surrounded by dead flowers and cold plates, swallowing the poison they themselves had brewed. Autumn brought cold winds that swept the dry leaves from the ash trees in the manor gardens, and with the same brutality, it swept away the remnants of Valdez construction. The collapse was swift, clinical, and absolutely public. 6 months after the christening, I was sitting in the small sewing room of my own house. The real one, a modest but immaculate dwelling in the quiet northern suburbs of the city. Outside, a fine rain was falling, but inside my room, it smelled of cotton thread, neutral soap, and the freshly brewed coffee that Sylvia Montenegro had just served us. Sylvia came the first Tuesday of every month to give me the financial report for San Miguel Holdings. We had developed a silent and efficient routine. She would open her leather briefcase on my cutting table, show me the shining numbers of the operating agency, and then, with that relentless neutrality that characterized her, update me on the fate of my former tormentors. "The liquidation process ended yesterday, Miss Norma," Sylvia said, taking a sip from a ceramic cup while reviewing a printed folio. "The bank foreclosed on architect Valdez's house in the golf club. They auctioned the property behind closed doors to cover the construction company's labor liabilities. They also seized the 2 luxury SUVs and froze personal bank accounts. Absolutely nothing was left." I didn't stop sewing. I held a small navy blue cotton romper in my hands, which I was preparing for Emilio's first birthday. The needle moved in and out of the fabric with hypnotic precision. Where are they living? I asked, without looking up from my sewing, keeping my voice in a purely informative tone, devoid of any residual emotion. Sylvia turned a page of her report, adjusting her glasses. They rented a 2-bedroom apartment in the industrial zone, near where you and Mr. Arthur had your first food store. Ironically, Stephen got a job as a low-level technical draftsman at an architectural firm that belongs to one of the men he used to humiliate at the club. He earns minimum wage. I'm told he's aged 10 years overnight. He no longer raises his voice. He no longer looks anyone in the eye. I pulled the thread, securing a wooden button on the chest of the romper. And Luciana? Sylvia paused briefly. It was the only time I noticed a slight trace of discomfort in her professional demeanor. Luciana doesn't leave the apartment, Miss Norma. She cancelled her cell phone plan because she couldn't stand her old friends blocking her on social media. The few times she's been seen, it's been at the neighborhood discount supermarket, walking fast, hiding her face under old sunglasses so no one recognizes her. She had to sell all her designer rings, piece by piece, at pawn shops downtown to pay the security deposit for the rent. She has become completely invisible. I cut the excess thread with my silver scissors. The symmetry of the punishment was so perfect, it almost seemed designed by a clockmaker. All her life, Luciana had treated me like a ghost, a shameful presence that had to be confined to dark corners so as not to spoil the aesthetic of her grandeur. And now, the entire universe had returned the favor with chilling exactness. She was the one hiding. She was the one lowering her head. She was the invisible woman, crushed by the weight of the very social disdain she had used as a weapon against me. "Justice makes no noise, Sylvia," I murmured, carefully folding the blue romper and placing it on the table. "It just puts things back where they always belonged. Thank you for the report. The manor's numbers look excellent this month." Sylvia smiled, closed her briefcase and stood up. "Everything is going perfectly, Miss Norma. By the way, Marcos asked me to remind you that the new wood-fired oven has been installed in the main kitchen. He's curing it this very afternoon." A genuine, warm, and deep smile illuminated my face. "Tell Marcos I'll be there Sunday at 1 o'clock. Don't let him schedule any commercial events for that day. The manor is ours this weekend." That Sunday, the sun shone high and bright over the ancient trees of Fresno Manor. There were no pretentious awnings in the gardens, no string quartets playing boring melodies, no politicians sweating falsehoods in tight suits. The immense swinging kitchen doors were wide open, letting escape the dense, honest, and overwhelmingly delicious smell of prime rib roasting slowly in the new wood-fired oven. It was the smell of true abundance, the smell of honest labor that Arthur and I knew so well. In the exact center of the grand main ballroom, right where months ago the table of lies and humiliation had been erected, there was now a single rustic wooden rectangular table, without imported linen tablecloths to hide its natural grain. I sat at the head of it. I wore my grey dress, the same one I had sewn with my own hands, perfectly ironed and clean. To my right was Daniel, laughing heartily, his shirt sleeves rolled up, pouring red wine into thick crystal glasses. To my left, Marina cut slices of freshly baked country bread, her face relaxed, freed from the financial terror that had threatened her home. And running around the table, with clumsy, quick steps, was little Emilio, dressed in the comfortable blue cotton romper I had sewn for him, no scratchy lace, no tight buttons, free to get his hands dirty. Marcos emerged from the kitchen carrying an immense steaming clay platter, wiping sweat from his brow with a clean white towel. He placed it in the center of the table with a satisfying thud. "Time to eat, family," the chef announced, his voice reverberating through the empty ballroom, full of joy and not a single drop of civility. He took off his apron and sat down next to Daniel, as the member of the family he had truly always been. I looked around. The immense ballroom embraced us with its luminous spaciousness. There were no photographers, no important people faking smiles, no appearances to maintain. I extended my right hand and rested my open palm on the rough, solid surface of the wooden table. I felt the natural cracks, the unyielding firmness of the material supporting the weight of our sustenance. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the aroma of the roast and the echo of my great-grandson's laughter, knowing with absolute certainty that for the first time in many years, my home was completely clean.